we'll have a chance to kind of get into all the nuts and bolts of the numbers here, I'm sure, in a minute. But, you know, I want to just firstly, kind of as a preface to why we're able to be out here talking about great economic statistics and news and the very real impacts those have on real people, is because of the fact that people in this province have done a remarkable job in following public health guidelines, and businesses particularly have done a remarkable job, diligent job in following public health guidelines, and because of that, they've been able to continue to operate through this entire period of time when in almost every other jurisdiction in the country they've been shut down. And that's had very real world impacts in that we now today have the lowest unemployment rate in the country, 6.3%, far below the national average, that we actually for the last 2 months have gained jobs in this province when right across the country jobs are being shed in very, very large numbers in some cases. And it really is a testament to the fact that we have had just remarkable degrees of compliance from the individual level, but also from our business community who have done just a great job. And because of that, we're able to be out here today to talk about the best economy and the best job numbers in the entire country and some remarkable investments that have been announced over the course of the last few weeks as well. So, turn it over to you guys.
How much of our sort of nation-leading numbers today are simply a result of the relatively strict lockdowns, public health measures that we've seen elsewhere? And if so, why should we expect that to continue once those provinces are in?
Well, you know, what I would say as far as the public health measures that were enacted initially in this province, but again in other jurisdictions across the country, is you don't see all those jobs come back. You don't see them all come back. And you know, we're still working on getting back to the degree of employment before the first series of public health measures we took, which were the most stringent as far as business closures and whatnot. So I think what this does, though, is it stands us in very good stead to continue with the strongest economic recovery in the country because of the fact that we are building from a stronger base than what other jurisdictions will be building from. And you know, that's not wishing any ill on anyone else. But I think it's been a reality that we've seen not just here in Canada but around the world, where there has been some very significant challenge in getting back to pre-employment levels, where there have been very deep and long-term restrictions on the economy. So I would say that, you know, we're going to continue to see growth here. There are going to be month-to-month fluctuations, there always are, but I think the overall macro picture of a strong base to go from, lowest unemployment rate in the country, coupled with what is going to be very strong private sector investment into the province, is going to mean that we have an improving jobs picture going forward, which is going to make us likely to be one of the lowest unemployment jurisdictions in the entire country for the foreseeable future. I mean, things can change, but as it looks right now, I think it would be fair to make that forward-looking statement. But I think, you know, we are just very well positioned because of both the current existing circumstance, but also that private sector investment to continue to grow.
It seems as though almost all the gains were in the service sector, whereas the goods producing sector actually lost jobs this month, last month. Are you all concerned to see, you know, relatively high-paying jobs in places like, you know, construction and manufacturing being replaced by things like retail?
Well, I think it was, wholesale and retail trade where we saw significant month-to-month gains. You know, you've heard me talk about this before, where I say putting kind of a lot of weight on the month-to-month numbers in certain sectors. It's really hard to, you know, based on the way that the labor force survey works, put a ton of stock into that. What I would say, though, as far as the investment, construction, for example, here's what we know. We know that there is going to be very real investment in construction jobs that are created. You know, whether those are going to reflect themselves in month-to-month numbers in the survey, you know, remains to be seen. But I know in the real world there are going to be people who are going to be working in construction in very high numbers because of the fact we're going to have thousands employed in new construction projects just from the projects that were announced recently, not to mention the fact that, you know, you have construction season here in the province, which is gearing up, you know, whether it be highway or other construction projects, significant public sector investment as well.
One more from me.
Yeah.
If we have such a strong labor market right now, why can't we afford to have a minimum wage that isn't the second worst in the country?
Well, I would say, just on the specific part of that, Minister Morgan likely is better positioned to comment on that. But, what I would say, though, the best thing for the economy is the fact that we have an economy that's creating jobs, that is in a position to continue to create jobs going forward and having people employed. And, that's been my focus from Trade and Export Development and Immigration and Career Training, is creating the conditions for that investment to occur and people to have the skills to take advantage of those jobs when they appear, and that's what we're going to continue to do, and I'm very bullish on what that future looks like for the labor market.
I saw Mosaic announced that they'll be closing 2 potash mines today. I think they said it won't affect workforce, but is that concerning to hear for you at all?
My understanding, it's not a complete surprise that the K1 and K2 shafts were scheduled to be taken out of commission at some point in the next, foreseeable future, and that was the purpose of the construction of the K3 shaft. What my understanding is, and I haven't spoken directly with officials at Mosaic, but is that there was an increased challenge as far as the brine leakage into that K1 and K2 shaft. So, they're shifting production essentially from Esterhazy to the Collins A mine and then bringing K3 into production in the next number of months with an ultimate, by the end of the year, producing more potash than they had even prior to today. So, these are kind of challenges that exist in the potash sector. So it's, not a complete surprise. And, the fact that there won't be any impacts to their labor force, I think, speaks to the fact there's going to be an orderly transition in production.
And I noticed going through the survey today at the, I think, 15 to 25 age bracket, employment still above 11, not much movement since last month there. Is that something you see changing as, the restaurant industry kind of gets back where it was and I guess, restrictions fully, lift July 11th potentially?
Very good question. And I would suspect that you are in the real world going to see more in that 15 to 30 year age category back at work. We've heard stories, that are anecdotal, I guess, in the big picture, but are real in the smaller picture of, literally dozens of employees going back to work with existing, particularly restaurants. And that'll continue to be the case in the hospitality sector and restaurant sector as we move forward with restrictions being lifted, and particularly as we get back to normal, which we're very much hoping to do in the next 4 to 5 weeks. I think that will mean more employment in that hospitality field, which has been disproportionately impacted because of COVID over the last 18 months or so. I foresee a pretty strong recovery there, and that will be based to a degree as well on the increasing degree of comfort I think the public is going to have in participating both at restaurants but also in the hospitality and tourism space, which are making and looking at making significant investments this year. And
the young people might find some reassurance there and that some jobs might be created, but they are, I sort of jump on this again, they are coming back to the, I guess you said, second lowest minimum wage in the country. So I mean, how do you defend that when somebody, a university student, might not have worked for months now because they can't work in a restaurant. Now they're coming back, having to catch up, but still only making 11.
Well, like I said, I think that it is a positive, though, that those, whether it be a university student or other young people, have that opportunity to go back to work, and that's just not the case. I mean, I talked to one of my colleagues in Toronto just yesterday, and I mean the stark contrast between where Toronto was at today with complete lockdown, restaurants open only for takeout service, no clear firm date on which that is going to be changing, versus the fact that we have, in this province, never shut down indoor dining outside of Regina and the limited areas surrounding Regina over the last, since the very first initial round of measures. The fact that those young people have the opportunity to go to work is preferable to the circumstance they would find themselves in elsewhere.
Obviously, the last sitting here, you were under scrutiny from the jobs critic from the NDP. Do these job numbers kind of serve as a sense of self-gratification?
Well, I wouldn't put anything, I would just say this. At this point, the opposition's view is really not a relevant one. To the vast majority of the business community and the public, I mean, the reality is that the opposition really have zero credibility on the economy. That's the reality. And, as far as their criticisms, they've offered nothing in the way of alternatives. So, my focus has been working with our business community, working with the job creators, working with those who are creating wealth to find that path forward and create the conditions for those investments and jobs to be created, and that's what we're doing.
And now that the job numbers are good, what's next in your job to bounce back the province here?
Well, I mean, a big part of this is private sector investment, and we're going to continue to work with companies who are making decisions about private sector investment. We've been working closely with them for, that's our job. I mean, that's what we really do through our ECDEV branch of Trade and Export Development. So it's nothing new, but that's going to continue to be a real focus on working with companies to attract that investment, which creates jobs and creates opportunities.
And just to go back to the minimum wage, sorry. Yeah. But is there any plans to reevaluate what that minimum wage is and maybe have a more competitive rate amongst the other provinces?
Well, like I said, the specifics of how that all works are best put to the minister responsible, Minister Morgan. But, again, what I would say, though, is about creating the conditions for employment to be created, and that really has been the focus.
With the trends being how they are, and with all of these new kind of big sort of private projects that are sort of coming down the pipeline, do you think that we're going to get to full employment over the next year or two?
That's a very, very good question, Arthur. I think that one of the challenges we are looking at going forward from immigration and career training specifically's perspective is how we are going to address what I think are going to be sector-specific challenges in the labor market. And some of those have alleviated obviously over time, over the pandemic, but I think that we're going to have challenges in particular sectors in probably quicker than would be expected, but I think in the longer term, growing our labor market is going to be growing our labor pool to supply a growing need for labor is going to be a continuing challenge, and that's something I have tasked our senior officials at ICT with taking a very, very hard look at and putting a high degree of focus on. And part of how we have managed those challenges in the past has been through international immigration. That's going to continue to be a part of that solution, but I think we really do need to have a focus on how we can utilize folks who are probably underrepresented in the labor market, particularly in the First Nation and Indigenous community, and that's something we're going to continue to make a focus. I think we have, but it's something I've really asked that we put a very high premium on going forward to create conditions for long-lasting labor market attachment, not just tangential or transitional, but long-lasting, long-term labor market attachment from Indigenous folks living in the province. And I think that we can do that, and it's a bit of a different paradigm than I think what governments have looked at before, but I'll probably be having more to say on that as we go forward.
What are the sectors where you expect to see the sort of tightest labor conditions?
Well, it'll depend to a degree on how quickly we see the bounce back in hospitality and tourism. Those had been the sectors where we continued to have labor market challenges right up into the pandemic. So that could be a area where we have challenge. There may be some others that are emerging, but that's why we work really closely with industry about what their future needs are going to be and try and really tailor our training programs through SaskPoly and our regional college system to make sure that we're training folks for the jobs that are going to exist next year, not jobs that existed 10 years ago. And again, that's something we've really tried to make a priority as far as being responsive on the labor market front, looking ahead where the ball is going, not where it is right now. And those discussions are always continuing with companies and aligning that with our training institutions.
Shifting away from jobs for a second, you just pointed to how the hospitality industry has struggled throughout this whole pandemic. With premier events like QCX and Saskatchewan happening again this summer, how much are you looking forward to those events pumping money into the economy?
Well, those are just very important economic events, but I think they're really important social events as well for people to be able to take the kids. I know in my case I haven't been able to take my I have young kids. I haven't been able to go to the exhibition or the Meadow Lake Fair, for example, either for 2 years. And so I think there's both a social and economic component to it. Economic component's important, but part of the reason why we wanted to provide clarity as far as what the reopening plan was going to look like and why why we were the very first jurisdiction in Canada to move our reopen plan forward, why we were able to, in a responsible way, provide clarity as well on the potentially July 11th having the lifting of all public health restrictions, was because of the need for industry to be able to plan. I mean, you need lead time to plan these very large-scale events, and to provide that certainty to that industry for those who are responsible for planning them was a part of the reason why we wanted to move forward. So, I think providing that clarity is going to mean we are going to have events like the X and many like it across the province as well. And I think there's both an economic and social component to that are going to be very, very beneficial for Saskatchewan.
And do you think people will just kind of flood back to social events, or do you expect that?
I don't know. That's a good question, actually. I think what you've seen in other jurisdictions that are further along than us, Israel would probably be the best example, but some U.S. states as well, is that things have got back to normal quicker than probably people thought they would. Not amongst all, but I think that there, is a pretty high degree of willingness and desire on the part of a large part of the public to go back to normal. And, there's a bit of a transition period, but, you're looking at, watch the U.S. hockey playoffs, or hockey playoffs in the United States and the American cities, right? They're filling the stadiums, they're filling the arenas. Baseball games are near full in large parts of the United States. Even blue states, which have been, slower to move on restriction changes than other parts of the U.S., and there have not been major impacts because of it, even though they're going to have had lower vaccination rates when they made those changes than we will have when we're making our changes. So, I think that there will be a bit of a transition period, but I would suspect it's going to move probably quicker than some people think it will.